Computer challenge.
Tell me when we're ready.
We're good.
We're good. Terrific. Well, good evening, everyone. The hour being 7:02 p.m. on Monday, October 26, 2020. I'd like to call to order the City of Laconia City Council meeting. Before we go any farther, I would ask to have Councilor Haynes lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Councilor. We are joined at the Laconia High School Hewitt Culinary Arts Center by our city clerk, Cheryl Hebert, and I would ask her to call the roll, please.
Councilor Cheney.
Here.
Councilor Susie.
Here.
Councilor Littman.
Present.
Councilor Haynes.
Here.
Councilor Hamel.
Present.
Councilor Phelps.
Here.
Mayor Hosmer.
Present. Also in attendance this evening is City Council, City Manager, I don't think you want to be a councilor. City Manager Scott Myers, as well as City Finance Director Glenn Smith. First off on our agenda 7A, which is the regular meeting minutes of October 13, 2020. Minutes of the meeting were distributed to the City Council on Friday, October 16, 2020. With no changes or corrections submitted to the clerk, the minutes will be accepted as distributed. Nothing on consent and action items this evening. Moving along to number 9 on our agenda, which is an opportunity for citizens to comment for matters not on the agenda. Anyone here present with us here at the Culinary Arts Center or perhaps online? I'll look to the IT desk and see if anybody's raising a hand.
Nobody online is raising hand.
Thank you. Moving along to number 11, which is nominations, appointments, and elections. We did a number of them last week, and we've got a number of them to address right now. So moving to 11A, which was Dean Anson II, seeking reappointment as a regular member of the Conservation Commission to a 3-year term expiring at the end of August 2023. We're looking for a motion to move to reappoint Mr. Anson, Dean Anson II, as a regular member of the Conservation Commission to a 3-year term expiring at the end of August 2023. So made by Councilor Hamel, seconded by Councilor Phelps. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, I call the vote. Now, all those in favor, you raise your hand, say aye. 6 votes in the affirmative. Thank you very much, councilors, and thank you very much, Mr. Anson, and congratulations on being reappointed. Moving along to 11B, again, Dean Anson II is seeking reappointment as a regular member of the Lakes Region Planning Commission to a 4-year term expiring at the end of June 2024. I'll be looking for a motion, which will be a move to reappoint Dean Anson II as a regular member of the Lakes Region Planning Commission to a 4-year term expiring at the end of June 2024. So made by Councilor Felch, seconded by Councilor Haynes. Further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, I'd like to call the vote. All those in favor of Mr. Anson's reappointment, please raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
6 votes in the, all those opposed? 6 votes in the affirmative. Again, congratulations, Mr. Anson, and thank you for your willingness to serve the city. Moving to 11C right now, which is Brad Fitzgerald seeking appointment as a regular general public member of the Building Code Board of Appeals to a 5-year term expiring at the end of March 2025. Be looking for a motion to appoint Bradley Fitzgerald as a regular general public member of the Building Code Board of Appeals to a 5-year term expiring at the end of March 2025. So made by Councilor Hamel, seconded by Councilor Felch. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'd call the vote. All those in favor of appointing Mr. Fitzgerald, say aye. Raise your hand. Aye. All those opposed? 6 votes in the affirmative. Congratulations, Mr. Fitzgerald. Number 11D, which is, it is Joe Driscoll III, seeking reappointment as a regular member of the Weirs TIF District Advisory Board to a 3-year term expiring at the end of June 2023. I'd be looking for a motion to reappoint Joseph Driscoll III as a regular member of the Weirs TIF District Advisory Board to a 3-year term expiring at the end of June 2023. So made by Councilor Felch and seconded by Councilor Cheney. Further discussion? Seeing none, I'd call the vote. All those in favor say aye. Raise your hand. All those opposed? 6 votes in the affirmative. Congratulations, Mr. Driscoll, on your reappointment and your willingness to serve. 11E, Michael Dellavecchia, seeking appointment as a regular member of the Zoning Board of Adjustment to fill the remainder of a term expiring at the end of August 2022. I'll be looking for a motion to appoint Michael Dellavecchia as a regular member of the Zoning Board of Adjustment to fill the remainder of the term expiring at the end of August 2022. So made by Councilor Felch, seconded by Councilor Hamel. Further discussion? Seeing none, I call the vote. All those in favor say aye, raise your hand.
Aye.
Opposed? 6 votes in the affirmative. That motion passes. Congratulations, Mr. Dellavecchia, on your appointment, and thank you for your willingness to serve. On to 11F is Kim Coulette, seeking reappointment as a regular member of the Highway Safety Commission to a 3-year term expiring at the end of March 2023. I'll be looking for a motion to reappoint Kim Coulette as a regular member of the Highway Safety Commission to a 3-year term expiring at the end of March 2023. So made by Councilor Susi, seconded by Councilor Felch. Further discussion? Seeing none, call the question right now. All those in favor, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 6 votes in the affirmative. Thank you very much, Kim, for your appointment and your reappointment and your willingness to serve in the city. Nothing under communications, and tonight on public hearings, under 13A, we have a public hearing for ordinance 2020-194, refuse and household waste collection, and ordinance 2020-194-24, dump and disposal fees. Notice of this public hearing was made available in the October 15th, 2020 edition of the Laconia Daily Sun and posted at Laconia City Hall, Laconia Public Library, Community Center, and SAU. The proposed excess solid waste program should be self-supporting. All other changes do not have a fiscal impact on the city's finances. Action on this item will be taken up under unfinished business later on in the council meeting. This report was submitted by Wesley B. Anderson, Director of Public Works. I would like to open the public hearing at 7:10 p.m. And anyone wishing to have some input may do so now.
None of the online attendees.
Thank you, Glenn. I'd like to close the public hearing on this matter at 7:11 p.m. Number 13B, which is a public hearing for Resolution 2020-17 relative to the Lakeport area drainage, roadway, and sidewalk upgrades. Notice of this public hearing was made available in the October 15, 2020 edition of the Laconia Daily Sun and posted at Laconia City Hall, Laconia Public Library, Community Center, and SAU. Fiscal impact. Exact fiscal impact is conditional on interest rates at the date of issuance. Finance Department intends to advertise the bond in early 2021 so that the funds are available in March of 2021. Public Works anticipates the interest rate will not exceed 2.75%. Like the previous hearing, action on this item will be taken up under unfinished business at tonight's meeting. I'd like to open the public hearing on this matter at 7:12 PM, and anyone wishing to comment on it may do so now.
None of the online attendees are raising.
Well, we're going to give them a chance. We're going to give them a second here.
There we go.
2 of the 4 are our staff.
And the third is sitting over here.
All right, I'd like to close the public hearing on this matter at 7:13 PM. Under 13C, this is a public hearing for Resolution 2020-18, a resolution relative to authorizing the city manager and the Board of Water Commissioners to bond water projects in the Lakeport area in the amount of $1,800,000. Notice of this public hearing was made available in the October 15, 2020 edition of the Laconia Daily Sun and posted at Laconia City Hall, Laconia Public Library, Community Center, and SAU. Fiscal impact, exact fiscal impact is conditional on interest rates at the date of issuance. Estimated interest costs are estimated to total approximately $560,000 over the term of a 20-year bond. Like the other 2 matters before this, action on this item will be taken up under unfinished business at tonight's, the conclusion at the end of tonight's city council meeting. I'd like to open the public hearing portion of this at 7:13 PM. And wait, if anyone would like to speak, now would be the appropriate time.
No one is raising.
I'd like to close the public hearing on this matter at 7:14 PM. Thank you. Under 14, I believe Steve Hamilton is here, and we'll have assessing the presentation of the old to new values. Welcome, Steve.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. I will endeavor to be brief in my presentation and leave plenty of time for questions. I know you have a pretty full agenda for this evening. The process of annually updating values within the city is something that the assessing department undertakes. Is that better? Okay. My name is Steve Hamilton. I'm the contracted assessor for the city. The staff of the city and the staff of Whitney Consulting Group together work on the valuation of the property of the city annually. It's a pretty long activity. Tonight, we're just going to review some of the timelines on how the completion of the valuation update process this year went, look at the results of the valuation update overall, review some of the preliminary performance statistics, and also review the process for researching individual assessments if people have questions, and also how they can reach out to the assessing department for some informal information, and finally, when abatement request would be appropriate if a taxpayer is concerned about their assessment. Valuation update for the 2020, the timeline is typical for this to be completed on regular taxable property, non-utility property, as it were, in the beginning of September. This year's update was delayed. We had some complications within the assessing department. We had some time where we had an individual who was not available and we had to shift off a lot of duties. So one of the things that's really important is the validation of sales and the inspection of sale properties. So that process kind of dragged out a little bit longer than we would naturally anticipate. As a matter of our regular work, we're not making interior inspections of properties, but we do send out a detailed questionnaire to every person that purchases property within the city, and then we review those results. We also make exterior inspections of the property. Given the COVID-19 situation, we're trying to be very respectful of the taxpayers and residents of the city. We anticipate that the individual values will be available by the end of this week so that taxpayers can look up what the result will be for them specifically. The summary reported values that we file with DRA in order to set the tax rate, that the preparation of that report has begun. We have to wait for the finalization of some Department of Revenue Administration value estimates for utility property in order to finalize that document. And we're still waiting for the final calculation on some of those values. The ultimate goal is to facilitate the tax rate setting process and to not be in the way or be a drag on that process. We don't expect that there's going to be any extraordinary delay in that process given where the values are at this moment. So a few of the challenging types of property that we had to look at for this value update. Again, condominiums are a very hot part of the real estate market. I mean, the real estate market has been going up, trending up, and we'll look at some trending results. But over the past few years, there have been shifts between different styles of condominiums and different types of condominiums. Waterfront land value consistency is another issue which we've been trying to address. Some of these are long-term progress type projects because we don't want to have an overwhelming or astounding effect on the value of property based on the tax treatment of the property. So we try to make sure that we limit in some way the way that we approach increasing values in certain types of property so that there isn't a surprise for a lot of taxpayers, especially those taxpayers that may just own their property and haven't recently purchased it. They're probably going to be surprised in some way anyways, but we try to minimize those impacts. We've continued looking at and finding increases in land value for residential properties. This has been part of the trend is when there is scarcity of a commodity, the pricing tends to go up, and affordable housing units are in scarce supply within New Hampshire, but also within Laconia generally. And so we see those land values continuing to increase. And we tried to pay a little more attention to some of the things that we tax as real estate, but they don't really look like traditional real estate. So things like boat slips, dry berths, storage units, and docks. We've been trying to focus on this year to come up with some better ways to understand the value of them. Similar to last year, we paid a little more attention to the location and neighborhood factors than the style of construction of a house or building. The desired outcome is to look for uniformity in the valuation changes, particularly within locations, so that people who are located in the same general geographic area and in the same kind of market influence area are going to see a similar kind of impact on their property value. There's a summary of the changes of the city's value from 2019 to 2020. Overall, the change in value is 4.29%. That compares very favorably to last year, which was a little bit higher than 4%. If you break it down by different categories, you're going to see different changes in value. You'll see residential improved value increased by 4.74%. So those are for properties that have a home on them. So a residential property with a home on it. Residential vacant is what we refer to as unimproved. Not that there isn't an occupant of the property, it's simply that it's a vacant land that we refer to as vacant land. It's unimproved by a dwelling unit at that point. That sees a little bit more of an increase in value because in these market conditions, it's really not the cost of construction which has been going up significantly. It's really the value of land that has seen the larger increase. Manufactured housing units have seen an increase in value a little bit more than the value of single-family or residential properties. Residential condominiums went up by 6.4%. Residential apartments by just under 6%. And you can see the general trend. Commercial vacant is a little bit interesting. That category went down. However, the number of properties that were found in that category went down from 62 to 59, as there were 3 properties that moved out of that class because they were improved. And so that moved it from the commercial vacant to the commercial improved category. One thing that you'll notice is there's very little change in the current use categories. So for forest land is stewardship, farmland, those category rates are set by the current use board, and the New Hampshire Current Use Board didn't get their rulemaking heard by JALCAR, the Joint Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules. I think I got that right. In time to use those values for this year. So there won't be a change in those current use values for this year. So those couple of footnotes in that, we don't have the breakdown tonight of the TIF, the tax increment financing district values. The values here are not adjusted to account for any of the personal exemptions that will apply for someone who might qualify for an elderly exemption, for example. Those adjustments get applied when the MS1 report is completed. The value of the utility property is not completely known, for all of those values are not completed by DRA. And there are a few minor adjustments that may be required when we make that final report to the DRA of the total value of the city. This is a little bit difficult to see, but this slide shows some of the breakdown based on general neighborhood factors. We have a lot of different locations and a lot of different value influences within the city. One thing that we try to focus on is making sure that we're following good statistical evidence. And so we try to really focus on adjustments that are appropriate when we have a large enough sample of individual transactions that they can be analyzed with some statistical certainty so that it rules out much chance. And so if you look at some of the individual categories where there's only 1 or 2 or 4 or 5 sales that have occurred, this is out of the whole sample of 540 sales that occurred within the city in the year prior to April 1st. We try not to focus too intently on those smaller sample sizes. We're looking to try and keep our overall performance pretty good and the overall estimate of market value in the range of between 95% and 100% of market value. Some of those codes that you saw, I provided a little bit of a description on what those codes mean. So if you have some interest, you can find a little more detail on that following slide. This chart shows the trend in value for the net value of the city year over year from 2016, when the net valuation of the city was just under $2 billion, to today where the net value is just under $2.5 billion. The net value here is calculated by deducting the exempt property assessed value from the net assessed value.
Can you repeat those numbers again, please?
So for 2016, it was just under 2 billion. And in 2020, it's just under 2.5 billion.
Adjusted for what again?
So those are, the only adjustment to that is the exempt properties. So properties like schools, city hall, charitable property, religious property. Then we look at performance statistics to see how well we're tracking with market value in these adjustments that we make to the overall assessments. The ratio that we look at is the assessment to sale ratio. We track that from year to year. We source that from the Department of Revenue Administration in the ratio studies that they complete. The median ratio that we've estimated for 2020 is the midpoint. That there's a typo here. That should say of the 540 validated sales from April 1st, 2019 to March 31st of 2020. The coefficient of dispersion, or COD, that we talk about in assessing world, it measures how close you are to the target. And so if you think about an archery range target where the rings get larger and larger as you move away from the center of the target, the closer that you are to the center of the target, the closer you are to a dispersion of 0. That would mean you're perfectly lined up on all of those assessments. You'd be stacking the arrows right on top of each other. A COD of 20 would be the outer ring. That would be acceptable. You'd still be hitting the target.
I'm sorry, what does COD stand for?
Coefficient of dispersion.
Thank you.
Yep. And so that would be acceptable. You'd still be on the target if the coefficient of dispersion were at 20. That's a good, that COD and the median, those are good performance measures for the model. You can see for 2020, the median ratio is at 0.942 for the overall sample, and the coefficient of dispersion is at 13.7, which is a reasonable amount of dispersion given the wide variety of properties that there are within the city of Laconia. Because we're talking about sales of everything from a small storage unit to a dry berth to a boat dock to $1 million+ home on a lake. So that's a pretty reasonable amount of dispersion, and it tracks through the years pretty consistently. Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. And pardon me for being sort of a little remedial on this, but I look at these numbers and I see there's a consistency between 2016 and 2020. Consistency would ordinarily indicate it would be very positive, I would say. But is there and I don't know if you can do this, because I would suspect that each community has unique characteristics, so you can't compare communities. No two communities are identical. But I'm wondering about sort of benchmarks in your industry here, and what do you use? You tell us 13.7 on the coefficient of dispersion is ordinarily pretty good. It's consistent over the past 5 years, fairly consistent. It's a little higher this year. Help me understand what you rely on to show.
It's a great question, and Mrs. Hamilton would be surprised that there'd be somebody here who wanted to know that, because I tell her about it all the time. And she'll be relieved to hear that you get to hear about it. What we want to do is we want to make sure that we have a model that reasonably predicts the value within a relatively tight range. And so the goal is to be less than plus or minus 20%. So hit the target. That's the overall goal. We don't want it to be too tight, because too tight is a good indication that there's something going on that isn't about building a model to predict value. It's about aiming at a price and shooting at it. So the IAAO, the International Association of Assessing Officials, they have a standard that COD should be found between 5 and 20. Anything less than 5 would be far too good to be true. Or I suppose there could be some chance that was involved, but it's very unlikely to be true. And if you get above 20, then that dispersion is too much to be reasonably useful. So a good tracking is somewhere between, I'd say, 7 and 8 in a relatively homogeneous community. So someplace like Londonderry or Derry or Salem, you might find much more homogeneity within the real estate sample. The wider the array, the wider that dispersion. And so in that range between 10 and 15, that's pretty darn good for the kind of property set that has to be valued here in the city.
What's the, yep, what's the DRA's point of acceptable there?
20.
20.
So anything under 20. And in terms of the ratio, the range of the ratio has to be between 0.9 and 1.1. We try not to get too close to 1, because when you start getting close to 1 and you have a dispersion of ratios, then you have far more people who are assessed at higher than market value, and that can cause some concern. So staying in the range of around 94 to 96%, that's a pretty safe place, because that means more or less everybody is going to be at below market value. There are going to be a few that are going to be above, but it minimizes that impact.
Thank you.
I was wondering if you could address, sometimes there's questions that come up about the value of a piece of property, say it's $500,000, and it's kind of stays that way for a long period of time, but then when they go to sell it, it could be $1 million. So there's quite a disparity between what the taxable of the property and then what it sells for later on. Can you address why there would be such a difference on that? I guess I'm speaking like lakefront property where, you know, they kind of maintain, if they own it for a long time, like I say, around 500, 600, but then when it goes on the market, they can get $1 million for it or more.
That's a fantastic question. So if all I knew about valuing real estate is what I learned from sitting on the couch next to Mrs. Hamilton and watching HGTV with her, I'd know that the real estate market is just completely unregulated. And buyers and sellers don't care about the valuation model that we're trying to use to predict value. They look at a property and a buyer will just say, oh, that's the property I need. And can I afford it? So the purchase decision isn't about building a model or entering information into a model. It's more personal to the buyer. And so that unregulated nature is why there's an allowance for a coefficient of dispersion, because it's impractical to think that you're going to be able to precisely determine what the value might be. The other thing that happens, and it happens pretty frequently, and we can get back to HGTV on this as well, is that when people go to sell, a lot of times they do a lot of work before they sell that they hadn't done before. And sometimes those properties have been flipped. Sometimes they've been completely renovated, or oftentimes in lakefront properties, we see properties that get purchased and then torn down and a new house is built. A lot of times the assessment that you'd be looking at when you're comparing those two values doesn't match up with what's sold. So we have to take the value of what was there on the property on April 1st. They tear the house down and build a new one after April 1st. We can't value that property at the new value until the next April 1st. So we're stuck with that value. So that can happen frequently as well. So there are a number of different reasons why that happens. But again, the goal overall is to try and build this model so that it predicts a value for everybody's property based on all of the sales that happen without looking too closely at any individual sale to try and find the value of that property. Because the sale properties, they're really easy to value. We know what they're worth, they sold. So that's not really the trick of this, is to learn what you can from those sale properties and then apply them. And then there are times, like we've been seeing over the last few months, where things seem to be a little bit aggressive in terms of what people are willing to pay for property and what sellers are receiving for property. For us, we've been watching with some surprise the sales that have occurred after April 1st. Remember, the pandemic hitting in mid-March. By April 1st, nobody knew that we'd still be, wearing masks and locking down, and everything would still be like this as we enter into November. But certainly as the summer wore on, it seems as though more people wanted to focus on outdoor recreational activities that lakefront properties afford. So that's something that we're going to have to be watching pretty carefully next year, or next April 1st value. But these are great questions.
For the benefit of the public, can you explain why the April 1st date exists?
So April 1st, there has to be a date. And it was explained to me by an old Yankee who has been in the assessment line of business for a long time, that when property taxes in New Hampshire got started, the property that was most often and most heavily taxed was not real estate, because it didn't have a lot of value. It was livestock. And so it seemingly is a great time to inventory livestock around April 1st, because you can't move a big herd of oxen or cows or anything in April without leaving a big trail behind you. And so if you were trying to move your property around to try and fool maybe the selectmen who were trying to count inventory and then apply a value to that, then that seemed like a pretty practical date. That's the way it was described to me. I like that story because it feels very New Hampshire to me, but I can't attest to the veracity of it.
But it's a statutory.
But it is the statutory requirement. It's a single date of taxes. The taxes get assessed to the owner on April 1st at the value of the property on April 1st.
When these $500,000 homes become $1 million homes, what happens to the neighbors?
Well, so that's part of the restraint of trying not to move our assessed values too quickly to try and catch up with these occasional observations of sales, because the reality is that we don't set market value. It's the buyers and sellers that set the market value. And if the buyers and sellers are setting the market value now at $1 million for a $500,000 house a few years ago, that is going to have an impact on the taxes that everybody has to pay. But that's one of the reasons why we're watching very carefully what has been going on over the last few months to make sure that we can identify if it is just a blip Because if it's just a peak of value and it's going to return to some normal, we don't want to focus too intently on the top of that peak, because that might not be fair either. Okay, so the detailed property information is showing old to new values is going to be available on our website. By the end of the week, we're going to have a lot of information on the sales of property. People will be able to look up sales of property as they have in the past. Taxpayers can call 527-1268 with any question or concern about the results. If you have any concerns, please feel free to call us and let us know. We're going to be available to meet in person or speak over the phone. We're trying to do most everything that we can over the phone these days because it helps to keep the traffic down at City Hall. In City Hall, we're all doing the best that we can to fit into a relatively small common area. But if taxpayers have questions, please feel free to reach out and call us. If we can't resolve an issue before the final tax billing, there's a formal abatement application process where a taxpayer can request an abatement of the Board of Assessors. That's a process that begins when you receive your tax bill. And there's a deadline of March 1st. So between the time that you receive your tax bill and March 1st of 2021, you may file an abatement request with the city, but not afterwards or before.
Could you give us some statistics, again, for the benefit of the general public? What number of, out of X thousand properties went to abatement this past year?
So I'll get it wrong if I give you a specific number, but for the abatement request process, I'm going to say there was less than 60 properties that requested a formal abatement. We do everything that we can to understand people's concerns and problems before it gets to that point. And from that point, when people are either denied an abatement by the Board of Assessors or granted an abatement, but not in the amount they think they should have gotten, they can appeal that determination either to the Board of Tax and Land Appeals or in Superior Court. This year, we've only had 4 of last year's abatements appealed to the Board of Tax and Land Appeals. So we managed to find a way through this process of concern on the part of taxpayers without creating an unusual amount of disruption for them. And of those 4, 2 of them are people who had availed themselves of the process in the past. So it's a process that works well. We find a way to help get to an equitable solution for taxpayers.
Is there a benchmark standard to which we can judge as a percentage anyways compared to other communities, how often this is occurring?
So it would be, if it were more than 1 or 2%, then that would be a benchmark of concern in a year of a revaluation, which here in Laconia we do every year. And so that's well below that 1 to 2% range. And I think that having a good staff within the department and attending to those questions upfront early as quickly as we can, it helps us to keep that number at a pretty low level.
Do you have a date when tax bills will be going out this year?
I don't know the date that they'll be going out. I presume it won't be very long after we get a tax rate. We can't get a tax rate until the DRA finishes up their utility valuations. And so we're kind of locked in a waiting mode at the moment. They did drop some more values on Friday of last week. And so we keep on going back and looking every day to see, hey, have they caught up with the values that we're waiting for? I don't expect it's going to be much more than another week or so. And then the process of setting the tax rate requires all of the participants in the tax rate setting process being ready. So it has to have the county ready to go, it has to have the schools ready to go, it has to have everything, all of the finance forms in, so. But for our part, the valuation should be ready to go before the beginning of next week.
Percentage-wise, do you think our evaluations that we sent down to Concord match up pretty well with what the true evaluation is?
So I think that, that these values are definitely within market value. So they're definitely within that range. And I think that the performance statistics that we looked at are a pretty good indication of where they are.
So there shouldn't be no big surprise.
I don't expect there will be.
Scott, do you have a question?
Yeah, just to follow up on something that Steve was talking about on revaluation. Sometimes you'll hear communities that will go out and do a full-blown revaluation of the entire community, and they typically would do that every 5 years, Steve, as is recommended in law. So there's little changes along year 2, 3, and 4, and 5, and then you go get a full-blown reval, as they refer to it. I think that occurred in Laconia. That was the process for a number of years here, was my understanding. I think the last one occurred maybe somewhere 2008, 2009, maybe 2010, just before my time here. And when you're talking about the number of abatement requests, I believe, I don't have the numbers in front of me, it was well over 400 abatement requests came in because you're only doing that every 5 years. What we've started doing in recent years and continue to do is we look at the sales, we update anytime building permits are pulled, so additions, renovations, those properties get looked at. And then we will do what's referred to as cyclical. We'll go into certain neighborhoods, and haven't done this as much recently, but pre-COVID, we would do mailers, put notices in the paper that, hey, we're going to be in, asking you to come in. And as you know, the target is in a perfect world to do 20% of the properties. And if you do 20% a year for the 5 years, you have done your reval in accordance with what's in state law, but you've done it probably in a much less impactful way because you're moving the meter or the needle a little bit at a time, as opposed to every 5 years. And then the numbers really reflected the abatement request because people all of a sudden, you know, see a value that goes unchanged for 5 years and then wham, there it is. There's a lot more angst. So that's the process we've been using for several years now. And, you know, sometimes, I mean, there is a big cost to bringing in an outside firm to come in and go through your entire community in a short period of time. So we're avoiding that expense, but I think we're doing a more steady and solid as you go process, the way we've been doing it in recent years.
And it does seem to be more comfortable to the taxpayers too, because they get to know us, they get to know the staff, they get to know the process. And so they're much more comfortable, you know, just calling in and saying, hey, this doesn't make sense to me. And starting that conversation much earlier. When it's a firm that comes in from out of town and boom, they're going to look at everything and then here's your values. That can be a little bit off-putting to taxpayers. And so this process works pretty well for them as well as it does for the city.
In terms of real estate values, you know, generally the 4% trend year over year, last 2 years. What are you seeing with your work elsewhere in the state with your firm?
So we wrapped up a valuation update for the town of Derry this year. The last one they had done was in 2018, so it was a 2-year step up for them, and that was about 12%. And so they are impacted in a different kind of way, I think. Their proximity to Boston at a nice commuting route. And now, if you haven't been down Interstate 93 towards Massachusetts, it's opened up to 4 lanes going southbound now, soon to be open 4 lanes going northbound. So they have a lot of different factors that are involved in the valuation there. And so valuation change, it's like values from neighbor to neighbor. I mean, house to house, it can it can rhyme in a way. It's unusual to see community going down in value when everybody else is going up in value. But we don't see too many places that are absolutely consistent with what's going on everywhere. And it's hard. It gets confusing too, because you can hear some reports, realtors sometimes will talk about increases in the value or increases in property. And sometimes they're talking about transactions. Sometimes they're talking about asking prices. So the standards that they use to try and understand the way that values change through time are a little bit different. I know I heard on the radio this morning about a report of a 15% year over median selling price increase. But that's just the median selling price of properties that sold within that month, within that market. So it doesn't tell you an awful lot. It can tell you something about the direction that you can look at, but I'm not sure it's going to prove much about the big picture impact when we get to next year. I wish I could tell you what the values would be next year. I'd be on an island in the Caribbean someplace. I would have been there for all of this COVID wonderfulness. But well, anyways, thank you very much for your really good, insightful questions and for being a great audience tonight.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
Give Mrs. Hamilton our regards.
She hates it when she hears that invoke her name, even though it was in the most loving way. And I know you'll all attest to that.
Moving on, thanks again, Steve, to number 15, which is the mayor's report. Just a couple of items I'd like to cover this evening. I think first and foremost is the Buzzell House and Old Holy Trinity School and adjoining parking lot. That transaction was closed today, which I think is good news for the city in many respects, as far as increasing our parking capacity and certainly remaining open to what could become of the Old Holy Trinity School. I think, and Scott, perhaps that we can, it's probably something to come up for a motion here after discussing it. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was our discussion all along that when it came to the old rectory, the Buzzell House, is that the idea that would be that the city would market that property and potentially recoup some of the amount that we spent on the entire purchase of the land. So I don't see any reason right at this point to delay at all. And I would like to get this on the market quickly. And I would suggest, I think probably the best way, and I'm certainly open to further discussion on this right now, is that perhaps opening up a request for proposals for a commercial broker to express interest in handling the marketing and hopefully the ultimate sale of this property. I think there are a couple of certainly brokers in town that would probably be interested in it from different agencies. And, I think the market, as we heard, and of course, as we know, is still very strong. It's probably the right time to consider getting this on the market and maybe hopefully selling it fairly quickly. But Henry, yes.
I just want to make sure procedurally, in terms of, do we have to declare the property in some fashion in order to proceed in the fashion of the mayor just outlined, Scott?
Let me look at that. You're talking about declaring it surplus and available for sale. So I think we could do that concurrently if that's the intent. So yeah, we will make sure that we've dotted our I's there, but it would probably make sense to go through the process, and the city council controls that, or can authorize me, or controls it through me, however you would like to. But yes, there's probably a prudent step to declare it surplus, have a public hearing so that people can speak to it, and that's the process for any property you would declare surplus.
And then just
Yeah, please.
sort of another approach that we took that may be in addition to that is Obviously, one of the reasons that that property is attractive is its historic value. And in terms of when we looked at the old police station, which wasn't necessarily of historic value, but we were interested in terms of it being put to highest and best use in terms of looking at, if you will, the value that we were willing to accept for it. So I don't know if there's a component of that that should be considered in this situation as well, in placing it in the market like you suggested there.
Sure, we can, I mean, I think that building lends itself to a number of professional uses, and having walked through there and seen it, it lends itself greatly to office space. There's I believe 5 bathrooms in there, so a lot of what were bedrooms and sitting rooms have baths with them type of stuff, so it does lend itself nicely. So I hear you, and certainly we can control and ask some of those questions if we're not just looking to go for the highest offer. I think what you spoke about could lend itself perfectly, if you will, for the school parcel, because that's obviously more square footage, probably a little bit, harder to move. There's not too many people looking for, 12, 15 room schoolhouses and, type of thing. So, what we did, for those who don't recall, with the police station on Church Street, the old building that was vacant for years, is we put it out with expressions of interest. Let us know what you'd like to do with the building, how much you're going to invest in it, what the end use is going to be, how much you want to pay for it. And what we looked for was the right fit, as opposed to selling it and not having any control over what goes in, and mainly just because of the proximity in the downtown. But certainly, within phrasing it and working with whoever will market it for us, we can let them know that, the desire about the, historical character of the building, and it is in the district. So that's certainly a component of it, that building is in the historic district downtown.
I mean, I think we have an interest in terms of what taxable value. It's not just the sale price, but it's also, if there's going to be investment in upkeeping or changing it in some fashion, it's going to create a higher tax base. It helps pay for just invested. Thank you.
Correct, yes. Councilor Susie, did you have
I
a
just want to
comment?
make sure that we had that whoever was looking at it, we could control what it's going to be used for. And I think that's what you were alluding to, in a way that, in other words, we're going to market it for what's the end use going to be.
Yes, and again, I think that for
Not
what,
just the highest bidder.
right, well, I think if someone's going to come in and pay a significant amount of money for the rectory building, they're going to want to protect that investment.
Or the school.
The school, I think, is a completely different animal. I agree. So yes, the school, we could phrase in a way that, what are you using it for, and how can we do some kind of control going forward. I mean, we bought those properties, and there are some restrictions with them anyway, that they can't be used for certain things that the church didn't find acceptable, and that those uses are already there with the deed. So we could certainly look at what the use is, what the fit is in the downtown, and the school building absolutely is full options are available to council.
So I agree, Scott, and I think the rectory and the school are two different animals, as you say. The rectory looks like something that can be, it's a little easier to turn that into office space and make it productive commercial space, we'll say, as opposed to the school, which it might take, if there's interest in it, it might take a significantly greater investment. And certainly I think we'd like to have some discretion over that, but I tend to agree, if someone's coming in and spending a fair amount of money on the rectory, I don't think we can dictate too much as to how that property is used. Certainly, as it is part of the historic district, there are some restraints on what's done with the property, but I think there's a fine balance there. Yes, Councilor Littman.
So just hypothetical, one use could be office space, which has a value in town of, a relatively low value, versus, for example, if it was a condominium or some sort of housing situation. I don't know if the project lends itself to that. The value per square footage is significantly higher. So I guess what I want us to do is take a view of not just what the sale price is, but what the ultimate tax value and how it fits in with the, the master plan downtown, in terms of what would be attractive to fit in there. I don't want to pick a winner or loser, but I'd like us to have some sense of what the expression of intent is for developing it, and so that we can make a good decision.
I think we can get you there.
Okay, so that's first piece of property, the rectory. Second piece of property, the school. So I think we'd be looking for a different public document that would be an expression of interest in the property, which would be who's interested in it, what the sale price of that entity might be, what future use looks like, and I think that we'd like to have a little more discretion there. Obviously, we know there's a long history with that building. It's maybe a little more complex to develop at this point, but certainly I think before we do anything, I think we should be seeing what the interest out in the private marketplace is right now, private and public marketplace. So that's, I guess in the first instance here, would we look for a motion then to allow you to put out an RFP, Scott, on behalf of the city for a commercial broker for the Buzz Hill House, which is the rectory?
I think my and staff's feeling is we want to get that process going while the weather is still somewhat decent and there's a strong real estate market. So I think that would be an appropriate motion to allow us. I mean, should be a very quick turnaround time on that kind of RFP. It's a pretty straightforward, simple response from people.
Sure. So yes, would you make that motion?
Yes.
Councilor Susi, is there a second? Councilor Haynes is the second. Any further discussion on this proposed motion for an RFP for commercial broker for the rectory? Yes, Councilor.
I just want us to make sure procedurally we have it down in terms of what step has to go first versus second. And
I think we can do them concurrently. We can get an RFP out, and at the same time on your next meeting, we can have the first reading of declaring it as surplus property and then refer to the public hearing. So I think.
so I guess what I would just say is, subject to you confirming that that's the right way, that's the way we would proceed. If you would accept that as a friendly amendment to the motion.
I have one more question.
Would you accept that as a friendly amendment to your motion?
Yes.
Yes, okay, good. Yes, and your question.
The property, the way it is that you do the RFP on, I've been able to lay out what, with the rectory, with the garage, what area that's gonna be and what's gonna be left open for public parking and all that.
Yes, so when the diocese subdivided the parcels, there were a lot of easements, cross easements already built into the properties because, there's shared driveways in and out of the parking. But what we'll probably do is, and I've already mentioned this to our legal counsel and to our planning director, is that we'll probably further subdivide, leaving those shared easements in place, but probably look to do a boundary line adjustment, if you will, probably somewhere just on the back side of the garage. So the garage stays with the property. There's a few dedicated spaces that are parallel parking that are along the library side. That will be with that, and that would be dedicated with that property, and then the remainder of the parking is public parking on a first come, first served basis. So we would look to do that kind of a boundary line adjustment.
I'm just saying that because our ultimate intent to do all this was to add the parking to the downtown area. I don't need to see that all taken over by something that's what worries me about the school side of the thing at the same time, so.
We will work to do that boundary line adjustment so that the appropriate setback beyond the garage is basically where the new boundary line would be.
Terrific. Is there any further discussion on this motion that's on the table? Seeing none, I'd call the vote. All those in favor of this motion, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, 6 votes in the affirmative. That motion passes. Thank you, councilors, for your input and your support. Second of all, I think we'd be talking about a motion here to ask Scott and the city to put out a request for an expression of interest in the Holy Trinity School property, to sort of open that up to input from the public, if you will, as to what they see, if anything, potential use of that property might be. little broader here, but certainly I think it's in our best interest and certainly part of due diligence on our part to see if there's, what opportunities are out there for that piece of property. Any thoughts on that? Would anyone be willing to make that motion, the second, and move it towards discussion?
I'll make that motion, I guess, with the same caveat that make sure we procedurally have the sequence of things set up for it.
Absolutely.
Terrific. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Counselor Haynes. Is there further discussion from the council on in regards to the old Holy Trinity School property? Seeing none, I'd call the question. All those in favor of the motion that's on the table signify by raising your hand, saying aye. Opposed, 6 votes in the affirmative. That motion passes. And thank you, councilors, for your input on that issue. A bit of a housekeeping matter that's I neglected some time ago, a COVID casualty in some respects as far as this matter, but in making liaison appointments to the various boards, I wanted to appoint Councilor Cheney as the member, city council member to the planning board. That being a permanent liaison position now, permanent so long as we're all elected, right? And then I'd like to make sure that Councilor Susi is the alternate member to the planning board. If that's acceptable to you, Councilor Cheney and Councilor Susi. Thank you. Finally, as we all know, we're about a week out from Election Day. And certainly it's an unusual election cycle, of course, with being in the midst of COVID and certainly the number of absentee ballot requests and the move towards absentee voting. The Secretary of State has moved the state towards. But just as a reminder to those who might be watching tonight or listening, that Tuesday, the 3rd of November, is Election Day. Polls in the city will be open at 7 a.m. until 7 p.m. Absentee ballots can be maybe received right up until 5 p.m. on November the 3rd, and the vote will be counted. Certainly, if you haven't got it in the mail yet, you've got your absentee ballot. It's about time to get it in the mail just to make sure that it gets there in time. Voting, those that choose to vote in person, I'm very confident that our city clerk and her staff have put all of the health and safety protocols in place to make voting and mitigate any risk associated with in-person voting. Would remind those that want to vote in person, you do need a photo ID. If you don't have a photo ID, you can still vote. You have to sign a qualified voter ID and maybe have your picture taken. And all voters coming into the polls must wear a mask. Certainly, you can register. You have same-day registration in the state of New Hampshire. What you will need is evidence, either paper or electronic, establishing your ID, your age, your citizenship, and your domicile. If you don't have those items, you might be able to be verified by an election official that's within the voting precinct or ward. If not, you can, again, fill out an affidavit and have a photo taken as well. So there is certainly ample opportunity to cast your vote, and encouraging everyone to get out and vote. Any questions? The city clerk's office is open and open for those questions, or go to the city website or the Secretary of State's website. So that would conclude the mayor's report this evening. Moving along to number 16, which are committee reports, and I look to the council members. Are there any committee reports this evening?
The Finance Committee continues its work on the internal control policy. We'll be meeting again at 6:15 before the next council meeting to continue our work, working through that extensive document on internal controls.
Thank you, members of the Finance Committee, and your due diligence. Any other committee reports? How about liaison reports? Are there any liaison reports? Councilor Hamlin.
Yes. Thank you. Just a quick report on the Colonial Theater. It's, things are progressing very well. If anybody's been watching the photos that have been going in the weekly Laconia newsletter, you can see that the main floor they've been installing the stepping for the seats, and the floor is almost complete with that. Some of the theatrical equipment is starting to show up. The stage rigging has been being hauled up to the ceiling over the stage. There was 8 boxes that came. They're 800 pounds a piece. These are the motors and the structure that will lift the curtains and all this kind of stuff. So that's being installed now. The cement sidewalk was poured last week in front of the Colonial. They still have more to do, but now we're kind of at the end of the line again. So we got to wait for them to show back up. The sign is being reconstructed in concrete as we speak. And the last thing is that the Anderson windows have been released. The National Park Service has okayed it. I don't know if I brought this up last meeting or not. I did? Okay. So we'll skip that. But anyway, the windows are going to be ordered soon. It'll just take a while to get them. Other than that, things are just proceeding. The bathrooms are going good. The equipment for the kitchenette has arrived. So hopefully that can get installed soon. And they're working on quite a bit on the Canal Street side. So things are moving right along.
Terrific. Thank you, Councilor Hamlin.
Do you have a question, Bob?
Sorry. Yeah, of course, I didn't see it, that's all.
How are they doing on the empty stores that they also had as part of that program? Is there any potential people coming in there?
Well, Belknap County Economic is the ones who are going to own those stores. And they have had realtors looking around. People have shown interest. So I think that part's going very well also.
Thank you. Thanks, Bob. If there are no other liaison reports, we'll move along to number 18. This is an opportunity for citizens to comment on current agenda items. If there's anyone here, Culinary Arts Center, or anyone online, and that would be the appropriate time to speak concerning current agenda items.
Nobody has raised their hand online.
Thank you. Moving on to number 19, which is the city manager's report. Scott?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I have one reappointment to share with you tonight. So Pat Wood has agreed to serve an additional term on the Laconia Housing Authority. He's done a great job. They've got some upgrades that they're working on a few of the buildings right now. The Sunrise House is complete and being occupied already. So Pat is a very engaged board member and helped with the transition from the former executive director to the new one and focused on some other things going forward. So pleased that he has agreed to be reappointed. You have 2 reports in your agenda packet for the second meeting of the month. As far as the projects go, the final big project that's starting off right now is the Court Street Bridge over the Durkee Brook. So that's narrowed from 3 lanes to 2 lanes. We expect it to be 2-lane traffic with minimal impact the majority of the time. Various utilities are going to go in with, I believe it's directional boring underneath it and getting some utility work jump-started here. The bridge replacement will be scheduled to begin, weather permitting, the first week in April next year. And that is a complete street closure for 30 days, similar to what happened in the Weirs earlier this year. White Oaks Road got some asphalt shim in, I think, 4 or 5 locations. Maybe I drove it today over the weekend. So that is complete and looks good. The other update is where this council voiced support to explore creating a state agency or a state commission for oversight of the Winnipesaukee River Basin program. So right now, 6 communities have agreed and 3 have not taken action yet at this point, but there is a strong coalition moving forward on that. On the economic development report, you can see the unemployment. I'm on page 27, the first page of that report. You can see the unemployment continues to drop significantly from where we were in double digits April and May of this year to now in Laconia Pacific under 7%. And the state is anywhere from, basically a 6% number in Concord, on up through the state overall around 6.4%. The inflation number, for reasons that I've touched base on over many months now, continues to be very low. So the September number came in at 1.4%. So we are 3/4 of the way through the year on our inflation numbers, and we're annualized so far at 1.2%. And I remind you, that's one of the components that goes into the tax cap calculation, which provides the high end limit of the amount of taxes that could be raised for next year's budget. The second one being the assessed value of property. And as I mentioned at the last meeting, we're actually have already met last year's total pace. And as Stephen pointed out, through statutory regulations, the assessing year runs April 1st to March 31st. So any additional value that comes online between now and March 31st will be included in that component of our tax cap valuation. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions anybody may have tonight.
Mr. Couch?
Yes, what can we do about the junkyard down in front of Martell's bait shop?
Thank you for asking that question. So over the years, we have sent several letters to that property. Most recently, a letter went out in July of this year, maybe right around the end of July, maybe 1st of August. We did not get a positive response from the property owner at that time. The owner basically wanted to know who it was who complained about his property and wanted to see documents and those types of things. We sent a second letter out right around the end of September because we hadn't had any compliance or cooperation. We received a response back from the property owner's attorney about 2 weeks ago saying that the city is harassing and intimidating and being unfair to the property owner. It's a working marina, and then they put in a right to know request to want to know how many other marinas in the city had received similar letters either recently or any time in the past. We've searched our records. There were no other violations that went out to other marinas in the city. We understand marinas are working businesses. I think every other marina that we have in the city looks overall very respectable. This one has, if you have not been down on Winnisquam, this has significant junk, is a polite way to put it, that has no way, shape, or involvement in the operations of marina, that is just sitting there. And a picture is worth 1,000 words. We responded back to the property owner's attorney today. I saw a draft, so I'm not sure if the letter went out today or not, but if it's not out today, it's out tomorrow, and included pictures. Where this came from, actually, Councilor Haynes had reached out to me back in the spring and said, can we do something about the property on Winnisquam Ave? And Jen and I were out walking the WOW Trail the next day or two and came off the WOW Trail and came down to Winnisquam Ave. And I was the one who snapped a couple of pictures and then forwarded them on to Dean. So it wasn't a complaint in writing that we got, but this is not the first rodeo with this property owner over the years. So at this point, he has his attorney involved. We're responding. We're not backing down on it. It was not harassment. The reason he thinks it was harassment is because a couple of the neighbors, including this property owner, spoke at a Parks Commission meeting in the latter part of July about the crowding at Bartlett Beach. And I can go back and pull up emails where, again, Councilor Haynes and the chief of police, and we put in temporary no parking on, I can't think of the little dead end street, the court, their Lee Court. And then we put up some more signs, and then we moved boulders, and we put an attendant down there. So all of this was already in the works because of the COVID. The crowding of the beach caught us off guard because it had never been to that level in any other year. So really the claim that this is harassment or intimidation or retaliation because he spoke of it at a public meeting, we were very responsive staff-wise in trying to address that after that first weekend at the beach. So I can tell you that the overwhelming majority of property owners, when they receive a letter from the city saying, hey, you got an issue with your property, are on the phone to us. What do I have to do? I'm a little embarrassed. I didn't realize that, and get it straightened out. We get a handful, including the one that's on the corner of Roller Coaster and Parade, that choose to ignore and fight. And that one, we're in court. We've got a November, I forget the date in November, but it was supposed to be May, and that got changed because of COVID. So most of our property owners really try to do right. This one is an eyesore. And rather than spend a little time or a little money and get it cleaned up, he's chosen to spend that money on an attorney, which I think is unfortunate, not only for the city, but for the folks who live on that street and have to look at it every day.
Thank you, Scott.
You're welcome.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, Counselor Hanson.
Scott, thank you for cleaning up Cottage Street. I can't believe that there was that amount of stuff, but I'm sure there was. Is there anything that we can do in the future when the water is shut off and the power is shut off, we can prevent squatters?
That one was a little bit more interesting. And obviously there was some police activity involved and some arrests were made out of that. So that was actually on the city's radar well in advance of when the action took place there. And working, as our departments do very well together and communicating, the police department had asked that we not do any condemning and shutting down and doing. I believe both the water and the electricity were still on there. I know we couldn't have turned the water off during this whole COVID. And I think it may have been reported inaccurately somewhere. I do know that in the immediate day after that happened, we did turn off power, we turned off the water. I'm not saying all of the bathrooms in the house were functioning as bathrooms, but I believe the water was still on for it. And we boarded up the property. We reached out to the property owner. It was something that was received in an inheritance. The owner's out of state. There wasn't going to be a timely manner where this person was going to address the true public safety needs of that. So the city does not own the house, but we've gone in and done the cleanup because of some of the hazardous material and just everything that was on the property for public health reasons. Boarded it up to make sure it's secure that no one can go in. And we're working through the legal process to place a lien on that to get our funds reimbursed to the city because it truly was condemned and it was a health hazard. But the city doesn't own the property, so we're not going to, you know, I think we've done a very solid job there. And again, moved, I forget the number now, I want to say it was 15 tons of material out of there over several days. And so we've got it in a good place. And my understanding is the property owner is going to look to sell it, and hopefully that can move relatively quickly and the building can go to a better use.
What's the total expenditure on behalf of the city?
For the firm that we hired was $7,000, and we waived the tipping fee at the transfer station, but we tallied the amount of tonnage that is there. So we spent $7,000 for the cleanup, the materials to board up the doors and the windows on the first floor that were accessible, and we know the tonnage at the transfer station. So I'm thinking it's going to be somewhere probably a little over $8,000 that we'll be requesting a lien for on that property, so that we're first in line if and when it sells.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilor M.
Scott, does the property owner know that the electricity's been turned off?
Yes.
Okay, because cold weather's coming. If there's no furnace, those pipes are going to freeze and burst.
And again, this is not a property that the city has taken for taxes, so we, under the health emergency and that type of order, we were fine to go in and do what we did. We're not going to be going in and winterizing the property or doing anything along those lines. It's not our property.
Okay. can we maybe have a second contact with that owner and let them know that what could happen with that house? I mean, if they're looking to sell it, it's gonna be pretty.
I know we've been in contact with him at least a couple of times, so make sure that we stay at the forefront and stay up to date on where he is in the selling process.
Okay, thank you, Scott. Moving on to number 20 on our agenda, which is new business. This is a report submitted by Mark, 28, a report submitted by Mark Everson, the airport manager of Laconia Municipal Airport. And it involves an assignment and assumption of lease and a notice of assumption of lease. The issue surrounds transfer of some property from one business entity to the other. New Hampshire Aviation LLC, a Delaware limited liability company with an address of P.O. Box 295, Tilton, New Hampshire, 03276, is purchasing the hangar and improvements located at 50 Airport Road, Guilford, New Hampshire, from Viking Technologies Corporation, a Massachusetts corporation with an address of 8 Garden Road, Marblehead, Massachusetts, 01945. This transaction requires an assignment and assumption of lease and notice of assumption of lease. The fiscal impact of this transfer, there's no cost incurred by the city. The revenue generated by this lease agreement is payable to the Laconia Airport Authority and is used for the operation of the airport. At a meeting on October 15, 2020, the Laconia Airport Authority authorized Andrew Hosmer to sign the agreement and accompanying documents as chair of the authority. So the Laconia Airport Authority is seeking authorization from the Laconia City Council for Andrew Hosmer to sign the agreement and accompanying documents as mayor of the city of Laconia. So I'll be looking for a proposed motion here to authorize the mayor of Laconia, Andrew Hosmer, to sign the agreement and accompanying documents between the city of Laconia, Laconia Airport Authority, and New Hampshire Aviation LLC. So made by Councilor Felch, seconded by Councilor Haynes. Further discussion on this? Seeing none, I call the question. All those in favor, raise your hand and say yes.
Yes.
Opposed, 6 votes in the affirmative. That motion passes. Now we're on to number 20B, which is a request for city council endorsement to include a proposed roundabout on Route 106 Parade Road in the 10-year state highway plan. The Lakes Region Redevelopment Planning Commission is the agency planning the redevelopment of the former state school property on Route 106 Parade Road. They're proposing a roundabout at the intersection of Parade Road and Old North Main Street. This roundabout needs to be included in the updated proposed 10-year state highway plan, and an endorsement of the proposal from the city council would be important for its inclusion in the plan. The roundabout would be built when the development activity on the site reaches a point where significant traffic is generated. The roundabout would be similar to the one in Meredith at the junction of Route 106 and Route 3. Roundabout is proposed at this location because it would be detrimental to traffic flow to have two signalized intersections close to one another, as the signal at Parade and Elm Street are approximately a half-mile away. There'd be no fiscal impact on the city, as this location is outside the DOT compact zone. And this staff recommendation, the Planning and Public Works Departments recommends approval of this endorsement. This report was submitted by Dean Trefethen, our planning director. So I'll be looking for a motion to have the city council endorse the concept of roundabout on Route 106 in front of the former state school property for inclusion in the 10-year state highway plan. So made by Councilor Cheney, seconded by, there may be no second.
Well, second.
Thank you. Further discussion. I see quizzical looks on some councilors' faces. Councilor Felch, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard from quite a few people, majority of them don't want a roundabout. And most of the majority of them say it's kind of premature. We don't know what's going to happen with the property. We don't know what traffic's going to be like. And I'd definitely like to hear from more people before we even go forward with it.
If I might add.
Yeah, please.
I have routinely or regularly attended the meetings of the Lake Shore redevelopment. I think it's Lakes Region, but anyway. If you pay attention, they're saying that as the property develops and the need becomes apparent, they want the support of the city at this point to say, if that day comes, we would support that happening. I happen to favor roundabouts. There's one in the Weirs. There were tons of people who said, oh God, don't do it, it'll ruin the Weirs. And I haven't heard one person since that roundabout went in who hasn't said it was a vast improvement over the way it used to be. I think the point here is not that we're approving the idea of a roundabout today or even in the next few years. What we're approving is if the traffic flow becomes sufficient for a light, that rather than we put in a light, put in a roundabout. So I would urge you to support this from that perspective. Thank you.
Question,
Councilor Susie, yes.
do we know yet what the layout is of that property for roads or whatever else the planning thing is gonna do? I don't disagree with what you're saying, but I haven't seen any layout yet, and then I haven't seen or don't know, okay, what do we have for any say in that property? Okay, I mean, I know there's that commission that's been set up, hoping to get some state funds and all this kind of other stuff. But I feel like in a way, we're on the outside. They want to put this roundabout in. I have a hard time with some of the roundabouts. I think the state's got this roundabout fever. Okay, I see them all over the place, and I just.
Councilor Cheney.
There is no definitive plan for what's going to be put on that property. There have been a number of suggestions made, a sports center, retirement village, affordable housing, and others that don't come to mind right away. There's also going to be access to the property off of Meredith Center Road, at least at this point. I believe they want to do that. It is a piece of state property. The city, as a technical matter, I don't think has any standing to object to the plans. That said, I've certainly attended a number of the meetings, most of the meetings. Dean is there routinely. The manager's been there on a number of occasions. They have solicited our views of things and have asked where the city stands on things like improving the ballpark with parking across the street and that sort of thing. So they want to work with the city. And again, I want to stress that this particular thing is only saying the city recognizes if the level of traffic reaches the point where signalization is required, that we'd rather see a traffic circle than traffic lights. And I've been to Europe a few times over the years where there are very few traffic lights.
I did the wrong way in Edinburgh.
That's a whole different subject. That's the British who don't know how to drive. And then I happen to be Scotch, so I've been to Edinburgh and had the same horror. But these traffic circles go the way we drive, not the way they drive. And I urge you to support the idea. It's not saying that next month they're going to start digging in a traffic circle. They're saying if the level of traffic coming out of that facility reaches a level where signalization is necessary, rather than do that, they'd like to see a traffic circle. I think it worked well in the Weirs. I think it works well in Meredith, the end of Route 106 and Route 3.
Is this, is this our only, I mean, will we have another opportunity, council, whenever this comes up again, have another opportunity to, just is that what you're saying, Bob?
I don't think so. You vote for it, it's state property, it's state road. And then they're moving it down from the main axis that's there now, right?
A bit, yes.
It'd be quite a ways down.
Where would it
So they're
be?
gonna be making the access to that.
Not a great distance from where it is now.
Pardon?
Not a great distance from where it is now.
Well, the end of Old North Main is a ways down from where that other
Wait
entrance
a minute,
is.
hold on a second. Where Old North Main Street comes out,
That's where they wanna put it.
okay, it's right across from the road that goes up to where
Right,
the 9/11 Center is.
that's correct.
Is that where they want to
That's
put it?
where they want to put it.
What are you talking about?
That's not right across the road from that.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, it's right there.
It's on Zoom.
Oh, great, okay. Well, yeah, Dean Trefethan is on Zoom, so Dean, if you're available, perhaps a little input from your perspective would be helpful at this point.
Good evening.
Evening.
So a lot of the points have been made, but I think the thing to stress here the most is that this is inclusion in the 10-year plan, and we are looking to put it at the end of that 10-year plan, in year 8, 9, or 10, because realistically, the traffic level for whatever gets developed out there probably will not rise to a level needing some form of relief until much later in the years. To the question of do you get another shot at this? The 10-year plan is reviewed every few years, and then they come up with a new 10-year plan, and things could be moved forward if there's an urgent need, and things many times are moved back. The 10-year plan is in reality in New Hampshire, because of the funding level is more like a 13 or 15-year plan, to be realistic about it. So again, this is not something that's going to be done soon or even within the next few years. And it may be that it never gets built because the level of traffic just isn't there, but they are planning ahead for success. And if they truly are successful in redeveloping the property, then there will be traffic, and there will need to be something to control the traffic in and out of the project, and also the through traffic.
Thank you, Dean. Yeah, Council Littman.
I support Council Cheney's perspective on this, and, I think if at some future time, it doesn't make sense. Since the plan is revisited, we have more than one shot at it. I think it makes sense to put a mark in here in the event that it's useful for us to have it, that we're not 3 more years out delayed.
Thank you, Council Littman. I tend to agree with what you're saying. If I had to vote on this. But I think, Councilor Susi, you raised a couple of questions. What type of input do we have? I think that the city is represented pretty well on the Lakeshore Redevelopment Commission right now. The city appointee is Chris Shumway from Crisscross, who has been, I've met with him a couple of times on this project. He is extraordinarily well-versed and very thoughtful as he approaches this. And I think he's a good resource for the city. And I would also say Peter Spanos is on the commission as well, and represents the city's interest quite well also. So we do have a voice. It's a collaborative effort. I don't know if we could, we certainly don't dominate the discussion there as the city. I would much prefer to go through a rotary as opposed to hit multiple lights in the course of a quarter or a half mile. One thing about the state of New Hampshire and their 10-year plans, what's included in one 10-year plan, I think Dean alluded to it as well, could be part of a 20-year or 30-year plan. It's not, but I'd rather have a mark in there. So it's planned for, and if we do need it, the funding is allocated and we prepare for it. If we don't need it, we never have to use it. So I think there are a couple of opportunities to get another bite at the apple, so to speak, but it's just my thought on this. Any further input on this issue before we call the vote? Seeing none on this motion, all those in favor, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, 4 votes in the affirmative, the motion passes, 2 votes opposed. Thank you, Dean. Thank you, Council, for the discussion. Thanks for, Councilor Cheney, thanks. I don't get to all of those meetings, but I know that you're on just about every one of them. So thank you for your work on the commission and keeping abreast of what's going on.
Thank you.
Moving on to number 20C, which is looking to amend the city code, chapter 119, building construction, and chapter 135, electrical standards, to update the adopted versions to current versions, so the city is in line with state standards. Dean, are you still with us?
Yes, I am.
Would you like to, I know you submitted this, would you like to speak to this so the council has an idea of what's going on here?
Sure, thank you. We are currently on most of our building code standards on the 2006 versions. Every 3 years, they update them. So there's been a 2009, 12, and a 15 that have gone through. And there's also a 2018. Obviously, the state has adopted the 2015 version of most of the codes. They did that on the early part of this year. And we're looking to get our codes updated so that we have the same versions that the state is working against. We have had some instance where either the state fire marshal or the state electrical inspector, for various reasons, are in the city doing some form of an inspection, or in some cases they just do random inspections to make sure that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, which we are. And we have this conflict where they're looking to enforce the 2015 codes, and of course we're on the 2006 codes. So we have that mismatch that I think would be very beneficial to everyone to not have that mismatch. The second thing is, most of the contractors in the city and the developers do not work just exclusively in Laconia. They work in other municipalities around us. They work in Belmont and Meredith and Guilford, and a lot of those communities either don't have their own codes adopted, or they just use the state code. So a lot of the contractors are already used to the 2015 codes to some degree, and it's less confusing to them to have 2 different codes floating around as well. So for those reasons, we would like to get to the 2015 code.
Okay, thank you, Dean. Any questions for Dean while we have him? Okay, so there are 3 motions associated with this. And first one is to move to waive the reading of these ordinances in their entirety and to read by titles only. So made by Councilor Cheney, seconded by Councilor Haynes. Further discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, 6 votes in the affirmative. That motion passes. Second motion we're looking for is to move a first reading of ordinance 2020-119-10, building construction, and ordinance 2020-135-1, electrical standards. So made by Councilor Felch, seconded by Councilor Cheney. Further discussion on this motion. Seeing none, I call the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, 6 votes in the affirmative. That motion passes. And the third motion here is looking for a motion to move to schedule a public hearing on November 9th, 2020, during the regular city council meeting to gather public input prior to adoption. So made by Councilor Felch, seconded by Councilor Haynes. Further discussion. Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, 6 votes in the affirmative, and that motion passes. Thank you. Moving on to 21, our unfinished business. Is 21A still a placeholder?
It is. Very briefly, we do have a draft document from the attorneys that I got very late last week. We started going through it. This is in regard to the management company for the Colonial Theater. I forwarded a copy to the mayor, and Also sent one to Pete Lally, actually Pete and Brandon and somebody else from his team whose name escapes me. We're up on at the Colonial at some of their regular meetings that they've been attending, so that they're up to speed on everything. They came over to see me, so they have a copy as well, because we used the one of their contracts with another municipality as a basis for the framework of this contract, if you will. So it wasn't foreign to them. So it's a good working relationship, and everyone's kind of wordsmithing and looking at it. And hopefully we will have a completed document to have on the agenda for our next meeting.
Thank you, Scott. Moving on to 21B, which is second reading and approval of ordinance 2020-194 and ordinance 2020-194-24 regarding changes to the city's solid waste. We had a public hearing earlier this evening, and the Public Works Committee has reviewed Public Works proposed changes to the city's solid waste ordinances and recommends the City Council approve the proposed changes that are attached. So, unless there's a desire to work through this document here this evening, I will move right along to the motions. First motion be looking for is a move to waive the reading of these ordinances in their entirety and to read by title only, so made by Councilor Cheney, seconded by Councilor Haynes. Further discussion. Seeing none, I call the question. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, 6 votes in the affirmative. That motion passes. Second, looking for a motion to move the second reading of ordinances 2020-194, refuse and household waste collection, and ordinance 2020-194-24, dump and disposal fees. So made by Councilor Phelps, seconded by Councilor Susie. Made eye contact. That was deadly. Further discussion. Seeing none, I call the question. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? 6 votes in the affirmative. That motion passes. And finally, looking for a motion to move, which would be a move to approve ordinance 2020-194, refuse and household waste collection, and ordinance 2020-194-24, dump and disposal fee. So made by Councilor Felch and seconded by Councilor Haynes. Further discussion. Seeing no further discussion, I call the question. All those in favor say aye. Raise your hand. Aye. Opposed? 6 votes in the affirmative. That motion passes as well. Thank you to council, the councilors, as well as the Public Works Committee in your work in this area. Number 21C, which is the second reading and approval of resolution 2020-17 relative to bonds for the Lakeport area drainage roadway and sidewalk upgrade. This is a continuation of the public, but we had the public hearing earlier this evening. So this proposal was developed in coordination with the city's finance director. And we know that, I guess the important aspect here, we don't know the final costs associated with this project, but we do know that, or we do anticipate, Public Works anticipates the interest rate will not exceed 2.75%. And the staff recommendations, Public Works recommends that the City Council approve the resolution authorizing a 10-year bond for capital projects in the amount of $1.6 million. The first motion would be, we'd have before us is a motion to waive the reading of the resolution in its entirety and to read by title only. So made by Councilor Cheney, seconded by Councilor Haynes. Further discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? 6 votes in the affirmative. That motion passes. The second motion we'd be looking for right here is to move a second reading of resolution 2020-17, a resolution relative to authorizing the city manager to take any actions necessary to issue bonds for Lakeport area drainage, roadway, and sidewalk upgrade project in the amount of $1.6 million. So made by Councilor Felch, seconded by Councilor Hamel. Thank you. Further discussion. Seeing no further discussion, I call the question. All those in favor say aye and raise your hand. Aye. 6 votes. All those opposed? 6 votes in the affirmative. That motion passes. And finally, on this matter, looking for a motion to move to approve Resolution 2020-17 relative to authorizing the city manager to take any actions necessary to issue bonds for Lakeport area drainage, roadway and sidewalk upgrade project in the amount of $1.6 million. So made by Councilor Felch, second by Councilor Haynes. A further discussion? Seeing none, I call the question. All those in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? 6 votes in the affirmative. That motion passes as well. Thank you, councilors. Moving along to 21D, approval of bonding certain water line work within the Lakeport area. Again, this is the cost of the work looking to be bonded is $1.8 million. Exact fiscal impact is conditional on interest rates at the date of issuance, and the costs are estimated to be approximately $560,000 over the term of a 20-year bond. City manager and the Board of Water Commissioners recommend approving this resolution authorizing bonds for water projects in the Lakeport area in the amount of $1.8 million. We're looking for 3 motions here. 1, 2, 3. The first, Councilor Cheney, is a move to waive a reading of this resolution in its entirety and read by title only. So made. Councilor Cheney, seconded by Councilor Susan. A further discussion? Seeing none, I call the vote. All those in favor say aye. Raise your hand.
Aye.
Opposed? None. 6 votes in the affirmative. That motion passes. The second motion we'll be looking for is to move a second reading of Resolution 2020-18, a resolution relative to authorizing the city manager and the Board of Water Commissioners to bond water projects in the Lakeport area in the amount of $1.8 million. So made by Councilor Felch, seconded by Councilor Hamel. Further discussion? Councilor Hamel.
My only question is, will the water department be advertising this bond like Public Works is? Yes, for the best interest rate.
Absolutely.
Okay, because it's not stated in the other it is.
We would do that for all of them.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. So I answered.
Thank you. Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I call the question. All those in favor say aye. Raise your hand. Opposed? 6 votes in the affirmative. That motion passes. Third and finally, on this agenda item, we'll be looking for a motion to approve Resolution 2020-18, a resolution relative to authorizing the city manager and the Board of Water Commissioners to bond water projects in the Lakeport area in the amount of $1.8 million. So made by Councilor Felch, seconded by Councilor Haynes. Further discussion on this motion? Seeing none, I call the question. All those in favor say aye. Raise your hand. Opposed? 6 votes in the affirmative. That motion passes. Thank you, councilors. Moving right along to number 21E, which is approval of an updated motion for the CDBG-CV application from the September 14th, 2020 meeting. This is approval of an updated motion for the CDBG-CV application for the September 14th, 2020 council meeting. Per Donna Lane at the September 14th, 2020 council meeting, some wording in the original motion for the CDBG-CV grant application was lost.
I think omitted and skipped over, just some of these things just have to be spot on with the language.
Fair enough. So this report was submitted by Cheryl Hebert, the very own city clerk. So we'll be looking for a motion to authorize the city manager to sign and submit the CDBG-CV application that was approved for submittal at the September 14, 2020 council meeting, and upon approval of the CDBG application, authorize the city manager to execute any documents which may be necessary to effectuate the CDBG contract and any amendments thereto. So made by Councilor Felch, seconded by Councilor Littman. Thank you. Any further discussion on this motion? Seeing none, I call the question. All those in favor, say aye. Perhaps raise your hand. Opposed? 6 votes in the affirmative. That motion passes. That concludes our formal part of the agenda, leaving us now with council comments. Look to the council. Councilor Hammond.
Yeah, this goes back to the house on Cottage Street. I I think to be safe, I'd like to see the city send a letter to this person stating that the power is turned off. Because if we're the ones that did it, I need to have them come back and say, well, you turned it off, now all my pipes are. So I'd like to have an official letter sent to them notifying them of that. That's okay.
Happy to do so.
A certified mail, that you receive requested. Any other council comments this evening? Seeing none, I will declare the city council meeting adjourned.